In 1962, two researchers walked into an Oklahoma zoo with a syringe containing 3,000 times the standard human dose of LSD.
Right, just a massive, unprecedented amount.
Yeah. And they injected it into an elephant named Tusco. And within an hour, the elephant was dead.
It's a pretty heavy way to start, but yeah, that really happened.
It did. Welcome to our deep dive, everyone. Whether you're commuting right now or, just prepping for a meeting, get ready. Because today we are looking at an article that catalogs 8 of the absolute weirdest scientific experiments ever conducted.
And these are some wild case studies.
Oh, totally. Our mission today is to sift through these bizarre, sometimes genuinely horrifying stories to find those aha moments. We want to show you exactly how messy the pursuit of knowledge has been and how it shaped what we now call the modern scientific method.
Because the pursuit of knowledge is historically incredibly messy. I mean, we benefit from the pristine rules of modern science today, sure. But looking at the chaos of the past really forces us to critically question how we acquire knowledge in the first place.
Exactly. Honestly, reading through the source material, it feels less like reading a peer-reviewed journal and more like, I don't know, discovering a mad scientist's diary hidden up in a dusty attic.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. But it brings up a huge question. At what point does doing anything in the name of science cross the line from genius to pure madness?
Well, science is a process of trial and error, sometimes extreme error, but those methods of the past encourage critical thinking today.
Okay, so let's start with experiments where the researchers had completely benign, everyday goals like curing a disease or breaking a bad habit, but their methods were shockingly gross or just methodologically absurd.
Yeah, we have to talk about Stubbins F. Firth.
Yes, this is an early 19th century study on yellow fever. And F. Firth was entirely convinced yellow fever was not contagious.
Right. He hypothesized it was simply a physiological reaction to the stress of the summertime heat.
Which is wild.
It is. And to prove it, he bypassed all standard models and used himself as the primary test subject. So he collected vomit, urine, saliva, and blood from actual yellow fever patients.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because he didn't just, study these fluids in a lab. He rubbed them into open wounds that he had intentionally cut into his own skin.
He did.
He dripped them into his eyeballs. And he even drank the vomit.
And the kicker is, he didn't catch yellow fever from any of that.
Right.
So he proudly declared his hypothesis proven. He said the disease absolutely had to be caused by the summer heat.
Except we know now that yellow fever is completely contagious. It's just transmitted by mosquitoes.
Exactly. It has to enter the bloodstream through that very specific vector.
I mean, this is like someone eating raw chicken to prove salmonella is a myth, getting lucky somehow and writing a medical textbook about it. He drank vomit for absolutely no reason.
For no reason at all. Firth's experiment is a perfect example of confirmation bias combined with unseen variables.
Because he missed the mosquitoes entirely?
Exactly. When you have a predetermined conclusion like heat causes the fever and your incredibly extreme exposures don't make you sick, you just stop looking for alternative explanations. He never even considered a transmission mechanism he wasn't actively testing.
So he just locked into his very first assumption.
Right. And that failure to isolate variables gets even more bizarre when we look at psychological ailment.
Oh yeah, like the nail-biting study.
Yeah.
In 1942, there was this psychologist named Lawrence Leshon who tried to cure sleeping preteen boys of chronic nail biting.
Yeah, Leshon believed in a concept similar to sleep learning. His setup involved this dark cabin in the woods full of sleeping boys. Initially, he played a phonograph record on a loop that just said, "My fingernails taste bitter."
Over and over.
Right. But when the equipment broke from overuse, he didn't fix it. He literally just stood in the dark cabin and physically chanted the phrase 300 times every single night.
Wait, I need to push back on this. The article says he claimed a 40% success rate. 40% of the boys quit biting their nails.
That's what he claimed, yeah.
But couldn't that just be because these kids were absolutely terrified of the strange man chanting in the dark? Or maybe they just grew out of it.
You've hit on a critical failure in experimental design right there. He assumed causation where there was only correlation.
Because there was no control group, right?
Exactly. Without a control group of boys in a similar cabin who weren't subjected to the chanting, that 40% figure is completely meaningless. We don't know if the chanting worked as subconscious programming or if the kids were waking up terrified.
So even with a benign goal, human trials collapse without rigorous parameters.
They really do.
Well, it's one thing to have confirmation bias about your own body or mess up a trial on summer campers. But we need to transition to what happens when human curiosity is projected onto animals, with zero ethical boundaries.
This is where things get genuinely reckless.
Yeah. Like Ilya Ivanov in 1927, this Russian biologist went to Africa under extreme secrecy. And reading this, it sounds like a horrifying 1920s B-movie script that somehow got real government funding.
His goal was to successfully crossbreed a human being and a chimpanzee.
It's just unhinged.
He attempted artificial insemination of female chimps with human sperm, and when that failed, he returned to the Soviet Union with an orangutan, planning to breed it with willing human female volunteers.
Which he somehow actually found.
He did, but thankfully the orangutan died before the experiments could proceed.
Wow.
But the fact that he secured funding and approval for this just shows what happens when curiosity operates in a complete vacuum of oversight.
Which brings us right back to our opening story about Tusko the elephant in 1962. Researchers West and Pierce injected him with 297 milligrams of LSD. How does a researcher even justify jumping straight to a 3,000 times dose? Where's the scientific method in that?
There really isn't one. They made a fatal assumption about biology. They simply scaled up the human dose based on the elephant's massive body weight.
But an elephant isn't just a giant human.
Right. Their nervous system doesn't process chemicals the same way ours does. Elephants have highly sensitive neuroreceptors that process certain alkaloids far more aggressively.
So they completely ignored the mechanics of the brain.
Yeah. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Tusko tragedy highlights the dangers of extrapolating human pharmacology to completely different species.
Because Tusko panicked and collapsed.
And then the researchers tried to revive him by flooding his system with heavy antipsychotics. He died within an hour.
Which completely corrupts the data.
Exactly. We don't even know if the massive dose of LSD killed him or if the sudden influx of antipsychotics triggered a fatal shock. It represents a catastrophic failure in experimental design.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because we're moving from animal experiments that were just reckless to highly controlled, incredibly bizarre physiological experiments that actually yielded vital, modern medical breakthroughs.
This is the Macabre milestone section.
Yeah.
It asks if the ends justify the means.
Right. The article highlights Sergei Brukhanenko from the late 1930s. He created the autojector, and it's basically nightmare fuel.
The autojector was an early heart-lung machine. It mechanically pumped blood and oxygenated it outside the body.
But to prove it worked, he hooked it up to severed dog heads.
Yes. The severed heads actually lived and responded to stimuli for days. They would flinch at noises or blink when light hit their eyes.
Oh, man. Brukhanenko's autojector is essentially the terrifying beta version of the modern ICU.
It is the direct ancestor of modern cardiopulmonary bypass machines.
Which forces a really intense question for you listening. Would you accept the modern life support machines we use to save our families today if you had to personally watch the doghead demonstration that created them?
It synthesizes a huge ethical gray area. Brukhanenko's gruesome show directly paved the way for modern life support. We rely on that technology now.
It's hard to reconcile. But the article gives a modern contrast to this. The 2015 study with transparent frogs.
Ah, the CUBSC technology.
Yeah. They injected young frogs with this cocktail to turn their skin entirely transparent. You can see their living internal organs functioning. How does that work without killing the frog?
So biological tissue is mostly opaque because of lipids.
Like the fats in the cells.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those fats scatter light. The CUBSC cocktail is essentially a hyper-advanced solvent that strips away those specific light-scattering lipids, but leaves the structural proteins completely intact.
Oh, wow. So it clears the fog off the glass without breaking the window.
Beautifully put. And it shows how modern science is finding ways to observe biology without destructive dissection. It's a huge shift from the 1930s.
It really is. But leaving animal physiology behind means stepping into the darkest realm of all. Human psychology.
Right, when extreme methods were turned inward.
Yeah, testing the limits of human morality and obedience. Let's look at Carney Landis in 1924. He wanted to find universal facial expressions.
He drew lines on volunteers' faces and had them do these intense tasks, smelling ammonia, looking at taboo images, putting their hands in a bucket of live frogs.
And then, the final task. He handed them a live rat and a knife.
And he ordered them to decapitate the rat.
Which is insane. Most of them resisted, but Landis just kept pushing, and 2/3 of them ultimately complied. 2/3 just cut the rat's head off.
And he found no universal expressions.
I mean, obviously, why on earth would Landis think cutting off a rat's head would produce a clean, universal facial expression. People process sudden trauma so differently.
Exactly.
Wasn't he just accidentally testing obedience decades before anyone else?
What's fascinating here is that exact chilling through line. Landis accidentally laid the groundwork for Stanley Milgram's famous obedience experiment in the 1960s.
Milgram is legendary.
Yeah.
Inspired by the Holocaust, he wanted to see if normal people would do terrible things
Yeah.
just because they were ordered to.
Right, so he set up a real subject who was told to give electric shocks for wrong answers on a test.
And the person taking the test was actually a fake subject, an actor.
Exactly. The actor would scream in fake agony as the voltage went up and eventually go eerily silent.
The real subject would hesitate, obviously. They'd sweat and ask to stop. But the researcher in the lab coat would just calmly say, the experiment requires that you continue.
And despite their hesitation, 2/3 of the real subjects pushed the shocks to fatal levels, simply because they were ordered.
2/3? The exact same ratio as the rat study.
It's a cornerstone of modern psychology for a reason. It forces us to question the assumption that only evil people do terrible things.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean? We've gone from a guy drinking vomit to overdosing an elephant, dog heads on life support, and tricking people into thinking they're murderers.
It means we have to look at how we get our facts. When you read a headline about a new scientific study today, don't just look at the conclusion.
Right, look at the methodology.
Exactly. Look at how they got there. Critical thinking is our best tool in an age of information overload. The scientific method was built specifically as a guardrail against our own immense capacity for delusion.
You won't have to drink vomit or shock your neighbors anytime soon, hopefully. But knowing this history is the ultimate defense against taking scientific facts at face value.
Absolutely.
Which leaves us with one final lingering question for you to mull over today. If 2/3 of everyday people were willing to inflict fatal harm simply because a man in a lab coat told them to do, how would those numbers look today if the authority figure wasn't the scientist in a room, but an anonymous algorithm or a digital voice on a screen?